All right, and I'll start the slideshow. Thank you all for joining. My name is Michelle Proscia. I'm the ag educator over at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Sullivan County. And my bread and butter topic here is intro to poultry production. So just a bit of background. I have raised Cornish crosses, Freedom Rangers, under the 1,000 bird exemption for a few years now. Previously when I lived on the farm. And so we raised them up from, hatching chicks that we got in the mail all the way up to slaughter. So again, any questions, just throw them down in the chat, but we're going to get started here. So again, this is the intro class. So we're just going to touch base on all these issues and topics that we have today. So we'll go through some meat and eggs, breed selection, equipment, feeding, housing, cost of production, just briefly, and just touch base on all of them. So if you have questions as we go, just go ahead. All right, so first up here, we've got, well, when you are trying to figure out which type of birds you'd like to go ahead and raise, you have to figure out what you want. So you have your meat birds and you have your layers. There's also some dual purpose birds that you can use for both, but for our purposes, we're going to speak about meat and layers kind of separately. So we'll talk about fast growing birds, specialty birds, layers. A lot of people pick them based on egg color. So you have your regular brown and white ones, but you also have different colored ones, such as like the Arancana, the kind of Easter egg color. That's really fancy and people like to see at farmers markets. You can also decide whether or not you want to be organic or not organic and just raise more conventional birds. And of course, free range versus pasture versus kind of commercial operations. But more or less what you're going to see for beginner farmers, especially here with us today, more free range or pasture ranged. So we have a bunch of different breeds and varieties. I'm not going to go through them all, but they're all based on your preference. You have more show style birds. You have different variations of the birds, whether they have, single comb, rose comb. Then you have different breed varieties, like, for example, Plymouth Rock, you have your white buff, barred partridge, blue or Colombian. There's so many different breeds out there. But it just all depends on what you want to grow. If you want to go specialty or if you want to raise different types of meat birds, the choice is up to you. So then, of course, I can't forget our littlest chickens of them all, the bantams. So I mostly, for production purposes, specifically if we're speaking about that, bantams are not going to give you the biggest of eggs, of course. They're mostly raised for exhibition or show purposes. However, there are people out there that do enjoy the bantam eggs or bantam, just the smaller birds in general. But that again, that's up to you. Then you have your standard size that are, it's your general term that's used for larger chickens or chickens that aren't bantams. And then, of course, they go up from there. I know this picture here is a little skewed, but it just gives you a nice idea, and you can find it online at the Manna Pro website, Purina Manna Pro, I believe. But it just shows you that different birds produce different colored eggs and kind of what their chicks look like. I just thought it was neat to show, if you're going for white eggs, brown eggs, darker colored eggs like the Morans, or the Americanas like we spoke about before. So this is just a neat picture that I wanted to show. All right, so first up we have our general meat birds. This is more or less what I've raised for meat production. And you have your Cornish cross and you have your Freedom or Red Rangers. Again, there's additional ones that can be accounted for, but this is what we're going to talk about today. So For your Cornish cross, generally these are the fastest growing birds that you can purchase. They're ready for processing, 7 to 9 weeks old, and they're going to give you about 8 to 10 pounds worth of meat, which is excellent. So they're known for their large breast meat. So in a little bit, I'll talk more about some of the feeding procedures to do for them, because they are bred to grow so quickly. You don't want to overfeed them and cause any health issues. But for production purposes, they're one of the more efficient as far as quickly growing. Then you have your Freedom or Red Ranger, which are definitely more active. They're more pasture efficient. They'll walk around much more than the Cornish crosses. The Cornish cross will more or less kind of sit and hope food comes to it, basically. Freedom Rangers, they're generally they're bred off of heritage breeds. They're slower growing, and they're ready for processing, after nine weeks or so. And they'll give you about 5 to 6 pounds worth of feed. So this is just my preference, but if you're raising these in a pasture setting, and your birds happen to get out often, it's much easier to catch Cornish crosses than it is Freedom or Red Rangers. But you'll get pretty adept at catching the other birds as well. Then of course you have your heritage breed, dual purpose per se. These again are the ones that, they're leg layers, but they are larger birds, so that they could be used for meat production. But again, these are going to be much slower growing, so they're not very feed efficient in terms of, meat to feed ratio that you'd be putting in them. They can take up to 24 weeks to grow out to an acceptable amount of meat or poundage that you can get off the bird. But they can be kind of complementary to your egg production, which is nice. So, birds that kind of grow up, they give you eggs, they can also give you meat. And folks do seek out heritage breed birds that are more slow growing too, because they tend to think that they are have the potential to be more flavorful just because they've lived a little bit longer. But again, these are the kind of choices that you have to make if you're going into poultry production on which birds that you want. So again, when we're thinking about what we want, kind of think about the different traits that we're looking for. So I don't know if you exactly live where we live here, but we have some hard, cold winters. So you're going to want to look for birds that are kind of cold hardy. They're vigorous. They tend to be early or moderately maturing as far as giving you eggs. And again, if you're looking for egg color, here's a nice little spread of the different colors that are available for eggs. And it's just something that might help you stand out in terms of marketing at, say, a farmer's market or at your farm stand, just to offer something a little bit different than what's out there. So some of the brown egg breeds that we have, Plymouth Rock, Speckled Sussex, Rhode Island Reds, of course, the Moran, they're very red, almost like or very brown, almost like a red tint to them. Wyandottes and some Australorps. These next few lists are not all inclusive. They're just kind of the main ones that I pulled out. So lots of research to be done here. Then, of course, you've got your Red Star sex-linked birds and Golden Common. And both of these birds are really nice because they're bred for high egg production. So you're going to get around 300 plus eggs a year, and they're pretty hardy though. But the thing with these, that if you try to reproduce them, what you're going to get is not going to be a Red Star or a Golden Comet. They're genetically bred specifically for this breed. So the next cycle or the next line would not be these hybrid birds. And you've got your white egg layers, like Leghorns, Polish, Ancona, some silver spangled Hamburg. So there's plenty of bird breeds out there. And Some are more funny looking than others. Like if you take a peek at the Polish, they're very sassy with their feathering there. But then, of course, colorful eggs. I did raise a bunch of these. They were just easiest and something that the customers were looking for as far as the multicolored eggs. Arancana, Easter eggers, Americana, and olive eggers. So pretty neat. So one question I get a lot about when people are starting to think about doing poultry is like, where do I buy these birds? There are a couple options. We don't advocate towards one business or another. We just give you options here. So, do some research or see if anybody has any references on if they've purchased from these particular suppliers before. But you can always buy them hatcheries online. There's Murray McMurray, Meyer Hatchery, kind of Freedom Ranger Hatchery. There's Cackle Hatchery. There's several. So just keep in mind that when you go to purchase on these hatcheries online, they're going to ship to the post office. So you want to make sure you're available because they don't, the post office doesn't like hearing chicks all day, they're quite loud. And then B, you want to make sure you can get them into the brooder as quickly as possible from being shipped. And then of course you can purchase from farms. It's best to purchase from a farm who's kind of tested and reputable, has great biosecurity, because once you introduce new livestock into your farm, you have the opportunity to transfer any diseases that may have been on that farm onto yours. So you want to make sure that they have good biosecurity as well. You can purchase from local ag stores like Tractor Supply, Agways, Southern States, depending. Usually these stores have a 6 chick minimum, which is good because of keeping them for warmth. Best option would be to purchase chicks from a NPIP certified hatchery, which is the National Poultry Improvement Program. And it just makes sure that all their, they have good biosecurity, disease-free, that sort of thing. And they're reputable. Now, when you get your chicks in the mail, or if you bring them home and they're day old per se, make sure that when you do bring them home, you immediately dunk their little beaks in water to make sure that they A, know where the water is, and then B, have access to drink it. So that's super important. So you want to make a selection of your birds that, fit your purpose, and quantity of birds that fit your purpose. You don't want to be overwhelmed or not have enough to supply for your customers. And when you're going out and making sure that you are checking on your birds, you want to make sure that they're kind of, acting like they're supposed to. They're moving about, they don't look sickly. They are eating and drinking and defecating well. There's no diarrhea or anything like that. So just keep an eye on your birds as they're introduced into your flock. So when purchasing, there's a couple of terms that you may or may not know what they are, but there are options for when you buy them. You have a straight run, which is your mixed female and male. So you get what you get. You're not sure. Hopefully it's 50-50, but you never know what you're going to get when you order the straight run. So that's something fine when you order them for meat production. You get your straight run. You can have sexed birds, which are exclusively female. Obviously you can purchase female chicks, chicks or pullets, which would be for egg production. And then you can also purchase just straight male chicks, which would be, for meat production or reproduction if you needed some. One thing I did want to add is you don't need a rooster for poultry to lay eggs. You only need them to make more chicks. And a lot of places don't have roosters who do egg laying because they don't want to have any kind of blood spots or anything or fertilized eggs slip into the cracks of their egg production. So just keep in mind if that's something that you do or don't want on your farm. Okay, moving on into brooding chicks. Again, I do have a bunch of slides today, so I'm going to run through them and then I'll leave questions for the end. But Steph, if there's anything important or timely, feel free to interrupt. So for brooding chicks, if this is something that you want to do instead of buying them, just wanted to give you the gestation period for chickens, which is around 21 days, plus or minus 1 or so, but usually 21 days. And then it goes, up for ducks to 28, 35, pheasants are 24 days, turkeys 28. And if you are lucky enough to raise an emu, they are 48 to 52 days. I just wanted to throw the emu one in there because you never know. So brooding chicks, so this is just kind of the first section or first part you do when after the chicks hatch, you put them in what's called a brooder. And it's just a fancy term for a box that you're able to keep them safe from predators, keep them heated, keep them watered and fed. So I do have a couple pictures of different style of brooders, but there's a main cautionary tale that I do just want to mention before we start talking about, how to. You can see a heat lamp here on the picture, and I want to make sure that when you folks use a heat lamp that it's secured well and doesn't have the opportunity to fall into sawdust or hay. If they shatter, it should have like a shatter proof either bulb or guard around it, something like that, because this is one of the main reasons for barn fires. So we just want to make sure that if you're using a heat lamp or when you're using a heat lamp, to make sure it's secure and in a safe location. That's my PSA for that. So brooding chicks, so temperature wise, you want to start chicks at around 90 to 92 degrees inside the brooder. You can use a temperature gauge to know. And then you want to lower the temperature about 5 degrees each week after that. And then once it gets to outside temperature, 70 degrees, 75 degrees, you don't have to use a heat lamp. And then once they're old enough, say around 4 weeks, when they start to have feathers, then they can go outside. So that's just something that you can do in stages. So you brood them for, say, the first 4 weeks or so. Make sure your brood is large enough for all the animals or the amount of birds that you have, and then you can move on into outside. Kick them out of the crib. You want to make sure that the brooder itself is solid and it's large enough. You want to make sure that you feed and water the chicks immediately after placing in the brooding area. Again, you dunk their beaks into it. So usually I pick them up, make sure they're okay, and then put my finger on the back of their head and just kind of dunk their beak in, just to give them a taste so they understand where the water comes from. And you must make sure that you provide access to food and water at all times, because that's very important. This is the beginning stages of their life, and you want to get them off to a great start so they can be good to go by the time they're ready to be processed. So a couple examples of some brooder areas. They have those kits that are cardboard, which is fine. Circular is generally the best option for birds, for chicks. I mean, in terms of the size or the shape of the brooder, because what happens is birds, they're little and they tend to get stuck in the corner. And if they get stuck in the corner, they tend to pile up on each other, and then you have dead birds. So to decrease your mortality rate, or the chance that your birds might accidentally pile on each other and kill each other, it's easier to make a circle so they don't have the opportunity to pile in a corner. So just different things here. There's water available, feeders, the heat lamp. Just make sure they're able to get away from predators and things like that. Here's some other ones. So again, I don't recommend this particular cardboard structure. Here, I'll remove the arrow just to show you, makes me nervous. So I don't want any barn fires, that sort of thing. So wood in this case would be easiest, or a plastic that can, like a tub, that sort of thing. But again, they can be whatever you envision them to be, as long as they have the four main parts of the heat lamp and the feeders and the waterers. Here's some other ones. These are, people use the kiddie pools, people use livestock tubs, the metal ones, or the rubber ones, whatever you have. Then next step, you can see these birds are past 4 weeks old here because they have feathers on their wings, and then they have access to the outside, so they can go around and get some bugs and enjoy life. This is a great kind of visual aid for when you're using the heat lamp, if your birds are too hot or too cold. So as you can see in the top left picture, all these birds that are indicated by smiley faces are kind of just all around the brooder, not particularly on one side. They're in the middle, spread out. On the right top, you'll see that the birds have kind of shown themselves to the outside, which means they're too hot, which means they're, the height of the heat lamp is either too low, or it's just too hot in there for them. So they're all spread to the outside. If they're too cold, they're going to ball up on the inside underneath the heat lamp. And if it's too drafty, they're going to all stay to one side. So just a nice visual aid to see the differences on how to keep your birds at a proper temperature and make them happy. So for water, I can't stress water enough. It's the most important nutrient. So make sure that it's clean and cool at all times. Don't create what we call a bacteria soup. I know with birds, or especially ducks, it can be hard, but do your best. They even have waterers that are off the ground that you can hang up, so they can't necessarily step in it. So just make sure you adjust the height based on the size of your birds. But again, just changing the water a couple times a day as you see it. If it gets dirty, that's just something that's beneficial to the birds. You can also add vitamins or electrolytes in the water if you see fit. Normally just regular water is fine as well. So when getting ready for your birds, you have general equipment that's needed depending on what you have. As a minimum, you always are going to need feeders, waterers, heat lamps if you're brooding, and fencing of some sort. Then of course, for laying purposes, you're going to need some nesting boxes for the birds to lay in. I have a couple of pictures later of different variations of nesting boxes, but generally you want one box for every 4 birds, just to make sure there isn't competition for laying, and then they decide to lay like somewhere that's not helpful for anybody, like, underneath your car every day, or, someplace way away from the barn, because birds will do that. Anyway, but you just basically want to make it like a 12 by 12 by 16 inch deep. Make sure that it's got some soft material at the bottom so that when they lay, the eggs don't crack. And you can avoid some egg loss by mounting these nests above floor level, because it'll reduce them having the chance to peck on the eggs and destroy them. And make sure you provide enough nests and pick them regularly. So for your laying operation here, oops, we got some pictures. So generally what I've seen is folks use what they have, and I think that's great. So if you have an old bug that you can fence in and use for a chicken tractor, perfect. But other ways are, using little structures or chicken tractors, different things, or somewhere that they have the opportunity to be clean, dry, draft free. It's well ventilated because you don't want ammonia levels to increase within the housing, because that's bad for the birds' respiratory system and you in general. You can either make it permanent or mobile, that you move around, such as like a pasture-based system, which is nice because then birds have opportunity for fresh pasture as you go. Generally, it's about 2 square feet per bird and about 4 square feet per run. The run would be the area where they are able to kind of run around and be fenced in. And you want about 8 inches of roosting space perch per bird, if your birds are roosting. So you can see in some of the pictures, they have the laying boxes in there, and other ways they have areas to run around. You always want to make sure that there's adequate feed and water space. So depending on your bird will depend on how big of a waterer or feeder that you are trying to purchase. So a couple other things is fencing. Fencing is a great idea because you want to make sure that your birds aren't straying, but it also helps prevent predators coming in best you can. And there's a ton of different fencing options, like more permanent or movable, such as the electronet fencing, or if you have like a specific area for your birds, you can do more permanent fencing structure. Okay, so this is something it's a little difficult to explain, but I'm going to do my best. But so with birds, you want to make sure that in their housing that they have adequate ventilation, but you don't want to have drafts. So I know it's a little bit of like a hard concept, but you want to make sure that the birds, that there's like the opportunity for ventilation and fresh air to come through. So you can potentially use a fan or windows. But as the cooler nights come along, you want to make sure that there's no drafts and that they're not catching chill. So that's something to kind of work through. But like a fan or an opening at the top of the structure that you have for their housing is a nice option for ventilation to pull air in. And of course, you want to keep the birds dry. So if we get a hard rain, you don't want the inside of the coop to be wet, and you want to keep the pens and the floor dry. So I know, do your best on trying to give ventilation, but prevent drafts when the colder weather happens. You'd want to make sure that your birds, if you are doing the pasture-raised system, that they have access to the outdoors. This helps with kind of natural behaviors like foraging and eating, bugs and pests and hopefully ticks. They do little dust baths in the dirt, and it helps with with the UV and the sunlight to make sure that they are absorbing the fresh air. However, with outdoor access does come some biosecurity issues. For example, right now, knock on wood, we haven't had any avian flu specifically in our area, but New York State is on alert. So, with wild birds flying over top of your outdoor birds, poultry that you have, is the opportunity for avian flu to spread. So just keep in mind that, there's always pros and cons for different things, but, and, just understand biosecurity issues as we go through. So I wanted to throw this in here just for folks to either be educated or to educate other people as we're going through. The USDA does have a definition for what free range poultry is, and it isn't very specific. So when you go into the supermarket and you see, free range poultry for sale or something like that, just know that the definition is that producers must demonstrate to the agency that the poultry has been allowed access to the outside. So, for commercial production, large farms, that definition may be a little bit different than what we see on smaller farms that have, more pasture raised systems. So these birds, by USDA definition, have access to the outside. So whether they use it or not, that's up to the bird, I guess. But just wanted to educate as we go. So here are some additional pictures of different kind of housing options that you have. These birds have the inside, and they also have access to the outside here with kind of a fixed house and a yard that's fixed as well. It's not going to be movable by any means, so they just go outside during the day when they want to and inside at night. Then we have what we call kind of like an egg mobile or a chicken tractor, where it's usually easily movable. Most often it's moved frequently, because what'll happen is the birds themselves will be on a specific location on that pasture. And if you don't move them frequently, they're going to be, more or less burning the grass, damaging the grass in that area. So you want to give the grass time to recover. And when it does recover, it'll be much greener because of all the manure that they've been depositing on that particular area. But you can see, I believe I have some pictures here. Here you go. You can see a couple pictures on what chickens can do to land if they're not moved. So over here on the left-hand side is a house moved not frequently. So you can see around the outside of the structure that they're in that it's pretty tore up, versus houses that are moved more frequently on the right. The area that it's moved is in stages. So, the birds kind of have burned up the area of more evenly than the picture on the left. So it's just keep in mind, and if you know about like the Joel Saladin style, I have some chicken tractors of his pictured on the few next slides. But he ends up moving them once or twice a day, just to keep the pasture in good shape and to give the birds access to fresher pasture. So when having poultry, it's always a good idea to use some kind of portable electronet fencing. If you plan to move them around a pasture, if not, you can do a more permanent style fencing. But always make sure you have a good charger, whether it's hooked up to electric at your farm or house, or there's solar charger options that are you can purchase. And it just all depends on what kind of operation you're running or where. So this are a few great pictures of nesting boxes. So I enjoyed them a lot, and I thought I'd share that you don't have to go out and spend lots of money on making these things. So you have, some with a little bit more humor, like the toilet seat. You have cat litter bins, you have tubs, you have buckets, just as long as it's able to be cleaned out and useful, more power to you. Use what you have, because the opportunity to save some money at the beginning is very valuable. So, however you want to make them. But again, make sure that you put something soft in there, like shavings or straw, paper, whatever is easiest to clean for you. So for meat operations, you know, we have a couple ways of doing things, but I just wanted to break it out and reiterate. You can do either permanent or mobile as far as pasture goes. The space requirements are going to be the same across the board. You're going to want 2 square feet per bird and about 4 square feet per run if you're, you know, pasture raising them. For meat birds, they don't need any perches or nesting boxes because they're not living long enough, or they're being processed before they're able to produce eggs. So they don't need any of that. So that's some savings for you. There's a bunch of different types of these chicken tractors. Kind of up on the right hand side is more the like Joel Salatin style, but you know, you can make things with tarp, wood. I made mine out of PVC pipe and a tarp. And of course, chicken wire fencing around the outside, so no predators could get out or in, and no chickens could get out. These types of structures are more labor intensive because you are going to have to move them twice a day, you know, maybe once a day when they're younger and they're not really burning up the grass a lot. So, you know, don't make them too heavy because they get heavy. So, but yeah, there's plenty of options as what you can do for kind of meat bird, poultry housing on a movable pasture setting. You can also put them on skids that you can move with a tractor. You just have to be careful that the birds move with you, or you can run over some birds, and that's not good. So you could have a floor or no floor. Just a couple other examples. Some are less predator proof than others. So, you know, just keep in mind, depending on where you're situating them, that, you know, predators can kind of bury underneath that particular structure. But, you know, if you keep an eye on them and notice things, you'll be able to be okay. But, you know, just things to keep in mind as you're trying to outfit your operation. Some more pictures. Again, I liked the one at the top the best. It's cruel, but you gotta have a sense of humor when you're farming, right? Anyway, so some portable pasture pens. Again, I said, you know, there's some pros and cons with it. They're very labor intensive because you do have to move them by hand. And it doesn't provide too much protection from the elements. So you want to make sure that when you are placing these, you're not placing them in, say, like a valley, or where if it rains a lot that the birds will get flooded. So you want to kind of keep them up at least sloped or higher up than the lowest part of the ground. Pros about that, it's flexible. You can make as big as you want. And low cost, which is nice, more than a permanent structure. It's good for beginners, and the best part is you don't have to clean up anything because you're just letting it go into the ground and moving to the next plot of land. So that's a nice opportunity. Less shoveling for everybody. And of course, you have your stationary pasture pens, and you can get as fancy or as simple as you want. Pros and cons with these are they are more labor intensive to clean because you don't get to just move the manure to the next pasture. You actually have to physically shovel these out to clean them. You generally have less pasture because you are fencing it in, and there's always more mud and dirt because the animals are concentrated in a specific area. So, you know, you're not going to be seeing much grass within the run as you would on a regular pasture-based system, just because the animals, you know, scratch it up, eat it up, that sort of thing. The pros for that are that they're really good at protection from the elements and predators. You don't have to move it, so that's a general positive. And if you happen to have an existing structure or shed already available on your property, it can be less costly because you don't have to build anything. Okay, moving on to feeding. And again, I'm just touching base quickly on the ins and outs. I'll give you some numbers on protein percentages to feed the feed and how to feed your chickens in a little bit. But main concepts for feeding is to make sure that you have, the feed available at all times for the birds that are allowed to have it all the time. So anything but the Cornish cross. We'll get into that in a little bit. You want to limit the amount of feed in your feeders so that they're not wasting, because the more feed that is wasted in poultry operation is money out of your pocket. If you are opening a bag of feed and you see any kind of mold or bugs or contaminated things in the feed, don't feed that to your birds. That's just a general no-no. And make sure that you clean your feeders in water regularly. And you can use a little bit of a bleach solution or clean solution cleaner, just to keep disease at bay when it comes to feeding. So, all right. So what to feed? So generally, what you're going to do is you're going to run down to your, local feed mill or box store, one of the ag stores that we have, and you can pick up already made feed, layer feed, ration, or broiler feed, pullet feed, chick feed, any of that's already been pre-done. So what you're looking for is the % protein that you're going to be giving the bird based on their growing stages. You can also purchase kind of like oyster shells or grit if they're not able to access the outside, just to help with their digestion, and always to make sure that you always have fresh and clean water available. So for your pullets, which are birds that haven't laid any eggs yet, you're going to want about 14 to 16% protein. For broiler production, about 20 to 24%. And for your layer feed, you're going to want somewhere between 15 and 18%. That's what you're looking for when you go to the store. Usually they're labeled as for the bird that you're trying to feed. So, you can just keep an eye on that as well. Okay. Get a little animation here. So general feeding hints, if you're feeding in the pasture setting, you want to make sure that you have about 4 inches of feeder space per bird, or you can buy one of the already put together kind of bird feeders that already account for the amount of space that is needed. And you want to make sure that you have enough feeders available so that the birds can all eat, more or less at the same time, so that they don't peck at each other. You never want birds to have competition. You can always raise up the feeders as they get older or increase them. And don't forget that even if you are pasture raising poultry, they still need feed to grow. You can't just not feed them and think that they're eating all the nutritional requirements that they need just by eating the pasture, because more or less they're not. Okay, so here is some feed production or feed schedules. These are for meat birds here. So earlier I spoke about Cornish cross feeding schedule. So again, these are fast growing birds, so you're going to have to limit their feed at some point here. So for week 1 to 3 of their life, you can feed them 20 to 22% chick starter. That's protein, 20 to 22% protein chick starter. At week 3 through 9, that's if you grow them up to 9 weeks. Most process them around 7. But you're going to be feeding them 18 to 19% protein grower feed until processing. At about week 3 of or age 3 weeks, you're going to feed them 12 hours on and 12 hours off. So what's that? That means that, say, if you're feeding them in the morning, you're giving them the amount of feed that they need for the day, and then you're removing the feeder at night before, when you check on them in the evening. So they only get 12 hours of feed per day. Because what they'll do is they'll overfeed themselves and can cause health issues with their heart, because they are fast growing. So you don't want to make them grow too fast. For freedom rangers, you want to feed them week 1 through 3, 21 to 22% protein chick starter, week 4 through 7, about 18 to 19, and week 8 through 11, 16 to 17% grower. So keep in mind that for a financial standpoint, the higher the number of protein that's in feed, the more money you're paying. So in addition to feeding the feed at the proper requirements that the poultry need, you're also saving money as they get older, so obviously 21 to 22 is more protein than say 16 to 17% grow protein in a feed. So for dual purpose breeds, you could do kind of week 1 through 8 at 26 to 28% protein, which is kind of what they call a game bird starter ration. And then you can drop it down week 8 through 12, 22 to 24%. And then week 12, oh, sorry, I have a typo here. Week 12, you're going to do 18 to 20% protein. So you can knock it down as you go, as they grow. Okay, so predators, they will always come. It's just something you have to be aware of and plan for and try to prevent. That's the easiest method to go about this. Depending on where you are, dogs, cats, they're your general predators. Then you'll see things such as hawks and owls and even snakes, raccoons, weasels. We have fisher cats here. So you want to make sure that you do your best to try and keep your birds safe. So you can have things like a guard dog, traps, what are those called? They look like red owls. They have eyes on them, little different tools to use outside to try to deterrence. That's what they're called. Deter animals from your area. Of course, fencing, electric fencing is very helpful. There's a couple good references here, different predators, what they do to the birds and what it looks like and how to prevent them. So just do your best to try to prevent predators and then adjust as needed. So just to keep in mind, I think that's it. There we go. One hen produces about 1/2 pound of poop per week, or about 2 cubic feet a year. So you're going to get a lot of feces. So if you're trying to use it as a whole farm planning type thing, if you have vegetables or fruit trees or whatever, you're going to want to make sure that you compost this manure. This kills any bacteria, and properly composting, you're then able to use in your vegetable gardens. You can also, there's lots of people who want manure, so you can always give it away, or put it online or things like that you want to that you have a lot. But you want to make sure that you're going to clean your waste regularly, because it's going to keep down on pests like flies, which nobody wants around. Birds simply don't want them, they just become pests. So you're going to want to keep it clean. And the best way to do it is to compost the waste, because it's not going to smell at that point once it's properly composted, and it becomes really good fertilizer for the ground. And make sure that you store your feed to keep down on pests from getting into your feed itself. So people use storage containers or, enclosed barns, things like that. So I'm not going specifically into reproduction and production today. I just mainly wanted to let you know more or less that, cockerels and pullets, those are young male birds, and pullets are female birds that haven't laid eggs yet, but they can become sexually mature by, oh, I can't see my slide here. Oh, there it is, 14 to 16 weeks of age. So if you plan on not having birds reproduce on your farm, you're going to want to have to separate them at that point or a little before. So just keep that in mind as you go. And generally, just to know that industry delays sexual maturation to 18 to 25 weeks, which does allow the birds to be bigger and be able to produce eggs more easily. You're not going to get the small eggs as you see with young birds. You're going to, it allows them to have more solid body conformation prior. But so if you don't want birds reproducing on your farm, just make sure that you separate them before they're 14 weeks old. Now with egg production, it often occurs with light stimulation. So as you can see, the longer the days get, the more eggs you will get. So that's why during the winter time, you see a drop in egg production. You can alter this or keep your birds producing more eggs during the winter months if you provide light, in their coop. So as little as 14 hours of light can stimulate reproduction. And you can stagger that in by means of, adding the light in the coop and kind of making the birds believe that it's spring and not winter. So you can do that if you want, or you can let the birds rest and have a molt during the winter months too. So again, pullets, again, they're the females under a year old that haven't started laying eggs. Most of those breeds, egg layer breeds, are going to start laying eggs around 5 to 7 months. And what you're going to see is more or less of like a bell curve for the first, 2 to 3 years of their life, or, their life cycle here. But the best egg years are from 1 to 2 years old. So if you're looking at it strictly at a production standpoint, you're going to want to cycle in or purchase some replacements to keep your egg production at a constant rate. Otherwise, what you're going to see is the bell curve of after 2 years or so, egg production for those birds is going to start to go down. I mean, it's not going to stop, but you're going to see much less. So what people do who need a constant supply of eggs is they add in or cycle in replacement birds so that they're ready by the 2-year-old mark for birds that are going to start dropping in production, so they keep and maintain that production standard. So that's something that you can do, or we can talk about as well. Birds have to learn about where to lay eggs. So if they're having a little bit hard time figuring out where to lay or what the nesting box is, they have those fake eggs that you can buy, or you can use like a golf ball to put it in to make sure that they know. They got to learn. So as far as laying hens go, so once you get into the egg laying stage, your full grown hen is going to average, and depending on the breed, 200 to 300 eggs per year. And that's for one bird. So keep that in mind when you're deciding how many birds you want to purchase, because this is how many eggs you're going to have to sell, get rid of, use, but this is what you're going to have. They are going to slow down in the winter. So, unless you add the supplemental light, and chickens are going to molt every year or so, and they're not going to look good. We get a lot of calls of people saying, oh, my bird's looking rough, what's going on? And usually it's a molt. So they're going to lose some feathers, gain some new ones. They're going to maybe drop in production a little bit. And because they're using the energy and food to molt and regrow those feathers than using it for egg production. So just keep an eye on them, make sure no birds are picking on them during that time. But again, that's just a natural thing that birds go through. So planning, I'm not going to talk about specific diseases here today, but there are plenty that can affect birds. So it's just good to keep an eye on birds that are not looking well, and make sure that you can quarantine them. But as far as planning goes, making sure that you have your setup ready prior to getting chicks, everything's disinfected, everything's good to go. You can always control coccidiosis if you have an issue with it on your farm. There's a feed that you can use, coccidiostat, that can go in the feed or water. Some people put apple cider vinegar in the water just a little bit, just to give them a little kickstart as they're young. You want to make sure that there is enough space for the birds so that you prevent feather pecking and cannibalism. Unfortunately, that is something that birds do. So you want to make sure they're not overcrowded. There's enough air movement. They have enough space for water and feeder and everyone to get along. Something else that is common, kind of external parasites, mites, lice, ticks. There are commercial dust baths that you can use. Some people use diatomaceous earth as well, but just keep an eye on it. It's all part of farming, is to go out and do kind of like a herd check or flock check, and just make sure no one has any hurt feet or any bleeding, and everyone's eyes are looking clear, and it's just a good way to keep an eye on your animals. And again, I think every webinar that we're going to have, we're probably going to talk about biosecurity, because we feel it's one of the most important topics and often overlooked. So just keep in mind that the shoes and boots and the clothes that you're using for your on-farm, that they stay on farm, or if you're going off farm with them to somewhere else where other people have animals, that's how disease can spread, through fecal matter, on clothes, on things like that. So you just want to make sure that you're disinfecting your boots or shoes, or you have a specific pair that stay on your farm. So we want to prevent any issues. So again, with planning, so this would be going back towards meat production. So for example, you got 100 meat chickens, and now it's 7 weeks is coming down to the end of when you want to slaughter them, but you forgot to check and see where the closest slaughter place would be, or if they even have openings for you. So you want to make sure that these are some things that you think about ahead of time. Call around, go to the facility, talk to the butcher, the slaughter manager, and make sure that they have room for you, or what the leeway time is that you need to make an appointment. But you can also process them yourself under the 1,000 bird exemption. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Also make sure that you have a veterinarian ahead of time. Some people don't use a veterinarian with chickens. It's just, it may be too costly, but it's always good to have a veterinary relationship ahead of time than when you need them that day, because they're more likely to come out to your farm if you have established a relationship with them ahead of time and they already know what you've got going on over there, than calling them up at 2 a.m. saying I have a sick bird. So yeah, just call around, see who services your area as far as veterinarians go. Okay, money. Everybody loves money. So let's talk about it. So with feed is one of the highest costs for producing your bird. Your bird, one bird, is going to eat roughly about 9 to 10 pounds of feed in the first 10 weeks. and that's for layers, or 8 to 9 pounds in the first 6 weeks, and that's broilers. So that can give you a good estimate of how much money or how many bags of feed that you're going to have to purchase. Your standard size chicken is going to eat about 5 pounds a month, if allowed to free range. But if they're kind of confined to the coop, such as a laying hen, they're going to need around 6 pounds of food because they're just not able to access the food or the energy that they need outside in the pasture if they're confined to their coop. So they'll need a little bit more feed. So disclaimer here, when I made this slide, prices were probably much lower than what they are now. So just adjust as you go. But for example, this was at an example from Tractor Supply, and at the time, the layer crumbles, excuse me, at 16% protein were about $14. A chicken's going to eat about a 1/4 pound a day. This means I spent about 50 cents in feed per week for one bird. So if I have overfull feeders, that's more money out of my pocket and less I'm going to get in return. So that's just a good way to estimate on doing some math on how much it's going to cost you per week, or how much you want to charge for your birds as far as food costs. Here's a excuse me, a nice chart here you can check out. This, I believe, was from Meyer Hatchery, and it just kind of showed the amount of feed that the bird was eating per week and how much pounds it would gain. So if I had a Demore 20% feed bag at $18 a bag, and each bag is about 50 pounds, that meant that that bag contained 36 cents per pound. Excuse me. And at the end, if I was going to be feeding out 13.43 pounds of feed at 36 cents a pound, it would cost me about $4.83 to raise that bird. So that's for one bird. So just keep that in mind as we're going through. Excuse me. Okay. Let me go ahead and do this real quick. All right. So now we have record keeping. So this is something that I find is extremely helpful for a lot of different reasons, but mainly you have, of course, tax purposes when you're filing your Schedule F. So you're going to want to know how much you're selling. If you want to obtain any credit or funding, the first thing folks are going to ask at the bank or for grants is, do you have a business plan or financial statements? You can also use it for a planning tool for financial and production records. And I do believe oh no, I don't show it in this one, but different financial records like cost of production, and then production records such as like mortality, eggs laying, you know, how many birds you have available to sell, you know, once you get them cut up, you know, how many breasts and legs and thighs and all those different production records that you have. If you're big enough, if there's any environmental regulations that you have to keep up with, and also identifying the origins of animals. For example, if you're selling animals to people or as livestock, you want to make sure that you know, that people know where they came from. So again, yeah, so I did have something here, but for information for record keeping, again, production records that we talked about, I've always kept information on age, number of birds, eggs, mortality and livability, live weight, dressed weight, temperature, if there's any big issues that happen, the inventory of what I have in the freezer, dates that I purchased. I kept all these information so I could understand if there was something wrong or if I could improve in certain areas that would help me make more money from my production, for my poultry business. Like if I was able to decrease mortality or understand that it correlated kind of with temperature, if we had like a hard frost or freeze or a storm or something, that I would be able to do better in those areas. Financial records, of course, all the money, right? So your sale of eggs, meat, how much feed cost, any expenditures like processing, labor, equipment, anything you bought for that particular enterprise. Feeding records, of course, that's how you know. Price of bag, number of bags purchased, the dates of when I did the 12 hours on, 12 hours off, so I can calculate a little better. So I believe I'm wrapping up here, but some questions to ask before buying. So what production system do you want? Do you want a meat or layer or both? How many? How much can your property hold? And this is important. Am I allowed to do this on my property? So we talked about this in the first week, but make sure that you check your zoning regulations and make sure that you're able to allow or have birds on your property. And if so, is there a cap on how many you can have? And any equipment needs. So as far as budgeting goes for when you're kind of trying to figure out your cost production, you're going to want to account for kind of chicks, feeders, waterers, your starter feed, the breeder box, heat lamp, anything that you've purchased for that particular enterprise, your freezer if you want to, and of course processing if you're doing meat birds. For egg production, similar stuff. Obviously you're not going to account for processing unless you're kind of culling some birds at the end, but you're going to have to add in your coop, egg cartons, bedding, nesting boxes, things like that. I just want to touch quick here on some different types of processing. So of course there's mobile processing units. Those are nice. I wish there was more around, but they're few and far between. But you have your state inspected plants, such as New York State 5A plants, and you have your federally inspected plants, such as USDA. And of course, you can do home processing for birds, which is nice that New York State offers that. So you can do up to 1,000 birds per calendar year, or 250 turkeys per calendar year. And you can do them on your own farm, which is nice. This is just a table from the USDA, and it kind of shows you the 1,000 bird limit, 20,000 bird limit, and so on and so forth, on where you can sell and how you can sell. So again, this slide deck is going to be available when we send it out via email. But, just keep in mind, there are different limits as far as how many birds you can process per calendar year based on the exemption that you choose. And some require like an application to do so. So processing eggs, as far as that goes, easiest way I can talk about it is quality begins in the barn. Because the cleaner your barn is, the less likely you have to scrub your eggs and clean off any manure that's on them, because in order to sell them to the public, they have to be free of manure on them. You can't sell them with that. So, having nesting boxes, clean nesting boxes is the easiest way to keep things clean, and collecting eggs frequently. You're going to want to get them at least twice daily, maybe more often in the extreme heat or cold. Hopefully your birds like to lay kind of all at the same time, but not everybody does. So you're going to have to want to make sure you collect them at appropriate times. And you're going to want to discard any dirty, overly dirty, cracked or misshapen eggs. You don't want them to go into the community. So when you are storing eggs, you should place them in a cooler refrigerator immediately after gathering and store it at about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. If you happen to be storing them in a refrigerator or cooler that also contains other food, make sure that you don't have strong smelling food in there, such as like fish or onions, because eggs are porous and they will absorb smells. So if you have a refrigerator full of onions and you have eggs in there, your eggs are going to smell like onions. So just keep in mind that if you do have a rooster, you want to make sure that there are no fertile eggs, because the embryo can develop, especially as temperatures increase throughout the day. So just keep in mind, nobody wants to crack open an egg and see a blood spot or, an embryo. So washing eggs. So when you're washing eggs, you don't want them to sit in water. Again, eggs are porous, so they can absorb the water, but not only the water, but the contaminants that may be in the water, such as fecal matter. So you want to just make sure that you use a sponge, they have fancy kind of egg washing machines, but depending on your scale or size, you can use a sponge to get the really dirty ones clean. Just use cool water to get that off. So that's one way to do it. Probably the easiest way. For selling eggs as requirements in New York State, there's a labeling requirement. In addition to not selling eggs that have manure on them, you want to make sure that that's cleaned off. But as far as the labeling requirement of the packaging, it's pretty simple. You have to have your name, address, telephone, or email, or some way of having the like if there's a chance of someone getting sick, they want to be able to contact the farm. So recall, basically. And you have to describe what your package is, such as eggs. You can add different marketing terms, pasture eggs, free range eggs, but make sure that they follow the definition of what the USDA has labeled out as what free range is and what's pasture raised and things like that, and the date that they're packaged. So for selling meat, specifically for poultry, you can you can get them processed at a USDA slaughterhouse if you can find one. More likely, you're going to be finding a 5A or state inspected bird slaughterhouse. I'm sorry, that you can get it cut up or whole. For 1,000 bird exemptions, you are also allowed to do cut up or whole, even though this says whole only. I'll change that in a minute. You can cut up your bird. For packaging regulations, you've seen it all. You want to make sure that the product name, weight, address, the handling certificate, and the ingredient statement is on there. What does it contain? And more or less, there's plenty of information that you can find on packaging regulations for selling meat, or if you need to, you can reach out to any of us. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. I know it was a lot of information and a little bit of time, but again, this is the intro class, so we wanted to get it out to you and make sure that you got it. So let me stop share here and stop recording so we can check